The Village Baker's Midnight Ritual, read by Chuck Brown. In the quiet village of Willowmere, where cobblestone streets wind between cottages with thatched roofs and window boxes overflowing with lavender, there stands a bakery that has served the community for more generations than anyone can remember. The building itself seems to have grown from the earth rather than been constructed. Its stone walls are the warm color of honey, and its wooden beams have been polished smooth by generations of loving care. But what makes this bakery truly special is not its age or its charm, but the ritual that takes place within its walls during the deepest hours of the night. Master Baker Elias Thornwell has been rising at midnight for 43 years, ever since he inherited the bakery from his mentor, just as she had inherited it from hers in an unbroken chain that stretches back to the founding of Willowmere itself. Elias is a man whose hands tell the story of his craft. Flour permanently embedded under his fingernails, palms soft from years of kneading dough, fingers that know by touch alone when bread has risen to perfection. His hair, now silver as moonlight, is always dusted with a fine coating of flour that no amount of brushing can completely remove, and his eyes hold the quiet contentment of someone who has found their true calling in life. Tonight, as every night for the past 3 years, Elias is joined by his apprentice, Mira Ashcroft. Mira came to the bakery as a young woman fleeing the noise and chaos of the city, seeking something she couldn't name, but knew she would recognize when she found it. She discovered it in the rhythm of midnight baking, in the ancient recipes passed down through generations, and in the peculiar magic that flows through the bakery during the hours when the rest of the world sleeps. Mira is everything Elias was not at her age. Quick where he was methodical, intuitive where he was studious, filled with questions where he had been content to simply follow instructions. But she possesses the one quality that cannot be taught: the ability to feel the subtle energies that flow through ingredients when they are combined with intention and love. Under Elias's patient guidance, she has learned that baking is not merely chemistry, but alchemy, not just craft, but art, and not simply work, but a form of service to the community that borders on the sacred. As the church bell tolls midnight, Elias descends the narrow wooden stairs from his apartment above the bakery, his footsteps creating a familiar rhythm on the well-worn planks. The stairs creak softly under his weight, each sound a note in a nightly symphony that includes the whisper of his cotton slippers against wood, the gentle protest of ancient hinges as he opens the bakery door, and the subtle shift in the building's atmosphere as it prepares itself for another night of transformation. The bakery in darkness is a different creature than it is during the day. When filled with customers and conversation, it bustles with bright energy and cheerful chaos. But at midnight it becomes a temple of sorts, a sacred space where the ancient art of bread-making reveals its deeper mysteries. The air itself feels different, thicker somehow, charged with possibility, as if the accumulated intention of countless bakers has saturated the very stones of the walls and the grain of the wooden work surfaces. Elias moves through the familiar darkness with the confidence of someone who could navigate this space blindfolded. He knows exactly where each tool hangs, precisely how many steps it takes to reach each station, and can locate any ingredient by scent alone. But tonight, as always, he begins not with lighting lamps, but with a moment of stillness, standing in the center of his domain and breathing deeply of the air that carries the lingering fragrance of the day's baking, mingled with the promise of the night's work to come. This moment of silence is not mere habit, but necessity. Elias learned long ago that the difference between ordinary bread and extraordinary bread lies not just in the ingredients or even in the technique, but in the intention with which the work is approached. The midnight hours are special precisely because they exist outside the ordinary flow of time, in a space where the boundary between the mundane and the magical grows thin. To work during these hours without proper reverence would be to waste an opportunity that comes only once each day. As if summoned by his presence, soft light begins to emanate from the bakery's fixtures, not the harsh brightness of electric bulbs, but the warm golden glow of flames that dance behind glass panels set into the walls. These lights are one of the bakery's many mysteries, installed by some long-forgotten baker who understood that the quality of light affects not only the baker's ability to see their work, but the very nature of the transformation that occurs within the dough. The flames flicker and pulse in rhythm with some unheard heartbeat, creating an atmosphere that encourages contemplation and careful attention to detail. Mira arrives precisely 15 minutes after midnight, as she has every night for the past 3 years. She enters through the alley door, her soft knock a gentle counterpoint to the crackling of the mysterious flames. Her arrival brings with it a subtle shift in the bakery's energy. Where Elias's presence had brought gravity and purpose, Mira's brings curiosity and joy. Together, they create a perfect balance of experience and enthusiasm, tradition and innovation that has elevated the bakery's reputation to heights even Elias's mentor never achieved. "Good evening, Master Thornwell," Mira says softly, hanging her cloak on the wooden peg that has been carved with symbols no one remembers the meaning of, but everyone agrees feel important. Her voice carries the particular quality that develops in people who spend their nights in quiet spaces, a natural tendency toward gentle tones that preserve the sanctity of the midnight hours. "Good evening, Mira," Elias replies, his own voice carrying the warmth of a man greeting his favorite student. "The dough we set yesterday evening is ready for the ovens, and I thought tonight we might attempt the shepherd's dream loaves for the McDougall family. Young Timothy has been having trouble sleeping since his father's passing." Mira nods, understanding immediately. The shepherd's dream is one of the bakery's most specialized creations, a bread that requires not only precise timing and temperature, but a particular state of mind in the baker. The recipe, written in the careful script of Elias's great-grandmother, calls for ingredients that must be gathered at specific times and combined with what the old notes describe as loving intention for peaceful rest. It is not a bread that can be made on demand, but only when the circumstances are exactly right and the bakers are in perfect harmony with their craft. They begin their work in comfortable silence, each attending to their assigned tasks with the fluid grace that comes from years of shared routine. Elias moves to the massive stone ovens that dominate one wall of the bakery, their mouths glowing like friendly caves filled with banked coals that never seem to burn down, no matter how much heat they produce. These ovens are older than the building itself, carved from single blocks of stone by craftsmen whose techniques died with them, designed to maintain perfect temperature through means that modern bakers can only guess at. As Elias tends the fires, adding fuel that burns with colors ranging from deep gold to pale blue, Mira begins the delicate process of preparing their workspace. She scatters flour across the wooden surfaces with movements that are part practical necessity and part ritual dance, creating patterns that seem random but somehow please the eye. The flour she uses is not ordinary wheat, but a special blend that includes grains grown in fields that are harvested only by moonlight, ground in mills that turn only during the deepest hours of night, and stored in containers that have been blessed by generations of bakers who understood that food prepared with sacred intention carries more than mere nutrition. The preparation of ingredients for the shepherd's dream bread requires particular care. Mira measures each component not by weight or volume, but by intuition, her hands somehow knowing exactly how much of each element the bread requires. The base flour comes from wheat that was grown in soil enriched with herbs known for their calming properties, chamomile, lavender, and valerian, that was dried in moonlight and ground to powder so fine it seems to dissolve into the flour rather than mix with it. To this foundation she adds water that has been drawn from the village well at the exact moment when the moon reaches its highest point in the sky, collected in vessels that have never known harsh detergents or artificial chemicals, only the gentle cleansing of salt and herbs. The water itself seems different from ordinary water, softer somehow, more willing to bind with flour, more eager to participate in the transformation from separate ingredients into unified dough. The salt comes from deposits found deep underground, in caves where no artificial light has ever penetrated, harvested by miners who work only during the new moon when darkness is most complete. This salt carries within its crystals the memory of ancient seas and the dreams of countless creatures who once swam in waters that existed before human civilization learned to measure time in hours and minutes rather than seasons and cycles. But the most important ingredient in the shepherd's dream bread is one that appears in no written recipe, mentioned only in the margins of the oldest notes as the baker's gift. This ingredient is intangible, yet essential. The focused intention of the bakers, their genuine desire to provide comfort to those who will eat the bread, their willingness to pour their own peace and contentment into the mixing and kneading and shaping of the dough. As Mira combines the dry ingredients, Elias prepares the yeast that will give life to their creation. This is not commercial yeast bought from suppliers, but a starter that has been maintained by the bakery for generations, fed daily with flour and water and love, allowed to develop its own unique character over decades of careful tending. The starter lives in a crock that sits in the warmest corner of the bakery, covered with cloth that was woven by the village's oldest inhabitant from flax grown in fields that receive the first rays of dawn each morning. The yeast mixture bubbles and froths with eager life, releasing an aroma that speaks of fermentation and transformation, of potential energy waiting to be unleashed through the magical process that turns simple ingredients into sustenance for both body and soul. Elias adds to this living foundation a small measure of honey gathered from bees that feed exclusively on night-blooming flowers, their honey carrying the essence of moonlight and shadow, of quiet hours and peaceful dreams. When all the ingredients have been prepared, Mira begins the process of bringing them together. She creates a well in the center of the flour mixture, a crater-like depression that will receive the liquid ingredients and begin the transformation from separate elements into unified dough. The pouring of the yeast mixture into this well is done slowly, with the reverent attention usually reserved for sacred rituals, because, in truth, that is exactly what this is. As the liquids meet the flour, Mira begins to stir with a wooden spoon that has been worn smooth by generations of bakers' hands. The spoon itself is carved from wood taken from a tree that grew in the village square for over 300 years, before finally falling in a storm that old-timers still talk about on quiet evenings. The wood carries within its grain the memory of countless seasons, of village celebrations and quiet moments, of children playing in its shade and lovers carving their initials in its bark. The stirring process requires patience and attention, qualities that the midnight hours naturally encourage. As the ingredients slowly combine, the mixture goes through distinct phases. First, a shaggy, rough blend that seems reluctant to cooperate. Then a gradually smoothing mass that begins to show the first signs of becoming something greater than the sum of its parts. Mira can feel the moment when the dough begins to truly come together, when the separate ingredients surrender their individual identities and agree to become something new and familiar. When the mixture has reached the proper consistency, Mira turns it out onto the floured work surface and begins the meditative process of kneading. This is where the true magic happens, where the baker's hands communicate directly with the dough, feeling for the exact moment when the gluten develops to the perfect degree, when the texture becomes silky and elastic, when the dough transforms from a mere mixture of ingredients into something alive and responsive. When the mixture has reached the proper consistency, Mira turns it out onto the floured work surface and begins the meditative process of kneading. This is where the true magic happens, when the baker's hands communicate directly with the dough, feeling for the exact moment when the gluten develops to the perfect degree, when the texture becomes silky and elastic, when the dough transforms from a mere mixture of ingredients into something alive and responsive. Kneading dough is both physical work and spiritual practice. The rhythmic pushing and folding, the gentle stretching and turning, creates a meditative state that allows the baker to become fully present in the moment. Mira's hands move in patterns learned through years of practice, applying just the right amount of pressure, folding the dough in ways that develop its structure without overworking it, feeling for the subtle changes that indicate the dough is ready for the next stage of its transformation. As she kneads, Mira finds her breathing naturally slowing to match the rhythm of her hands. The repetitive motion creates a kind of moving meditation that clears her mind of the day's concerns and focuses her attention entirely on the task at hand. This is why the midnight hours are so perfect for baking. The quiet darkness naturally encourages the introspective state that produces the best bread. Elias, meanwhile, has been preparing the proofing baskets that will create the shaped loaves as they rise. These baskets are woven from willow branches that were cut during the dormant season and dried in sheds that receive no direct sunlight, creating containers that breathe with the dough and impart a subtle flavor that cannot be achieved through any other means. He dusts each basket with flour that has been sifted so many times it feels like silk between his fingers, creating a surface that will prevent sticking while allowing the dough to develop its characteristic crust. The baskets themselves are works of art, woven in patterns that have been passed down through generations of craftspeople who understand that beauty in tools enhances the beauty of the final product. The spiral patterns woven into their sides serve not only aesthetic purposes, but practical ones as well, creating ridges and valleys that help shape the dough and create the distinctive scoring patterns that mark bread made in this particular bakery. When Mira has finished kneading the shepherd's dream dough, she shapes it into a smooth ball and places it in an oiled bowl to begin its first rise. The bowl itself is another of the bakery's treasures, thrown by a potter who worked clay that was dug from riverbanks during the dry season and fired in kilns that burned only wood from fruit trees. The smooth, curved interior provides the perfect environment for dough to expand, while the slight taper of the sides helps maintain the proper shape. With the specialty bread rising, they turn their attention to the regular loaves that will fill the bakery's shelves when morning comes. These breads, the daily whole wheat, the hearty rye, the delicate white loaves that the village children prefer, require no less skill than the specialty items, but they allow for a different kind of meditation. Where the shepherd's dream bread demands intense focus and spiritual intention, these everyday loaves invite a more flowing, rhythmic approach to the work. Elias begins mixing the dough for tomorrow's whole wheat bread. His movements so practiced they seem almost automatic. But there is nothing thoughtless about his work. Every motion is deliberate, every measurement precise, every decision informed by decades of experience and an intuitive understanding of how flour and water and yeast interact under different conditions. He adds cracked wheat that has been soaked overnight in water infused with herbs, giving the bread a texture that satisfies both mouth and soul. The rhythm of the work creates its own music, the whisper of flour being sifted, the gentle splash of water being added to mixing bowls, the soft thump of dough being kneaded on wooden surfaces. These sounds blend with the crackling of the fires and the occasional settling of the ancient building's timbers to create a symphony that speaks of productivity and peace, of meaningful work done with loving intention, of meaningful work done with loving intention. As they work, Elias and Mira talk quietly about the day's events in the village, sharing news and observations in the gentle way that midnight bakers do. They speak of Mrs. Henderson's arthritis, which has been troubling her more lately, leading them to add extra anti-inflammatory herbs to her weekly order of dinner rolls. They discuss young Peter the blacksmith's upcoming wedding, planning special celebration loaves that will incorporate flowers from the bride's garden and honey from hives that have been blessed by the village priest. These conversations are part of the ritual, too, because the bakers of Willowmere don't simply make bread. They create edible expressions of care for their community. Every loaf that emerges from their ovens carries within it not just nutritional value, but emotional nourishment, not just sustenance for the body, but comfort for the spirit. This is why they must know their customers as individuals, understanding their needs and preferences, their joys and sorrows, their particular hungers that go beyond mere physical appetite. The dough for the shepherd's dream bread has been rising for nearly an hour when Mira checks its progress. She presses 2 fingers gently into the surface, feeling for the exact degree of resistance that indicates perfect readiness. The dough springs back slowly, leaving indentations that gradually fill but don't disappear entirely, the sign that fermentation has proceeded to exactly the right point. Shaping the specialty loaves requires a different technique than regular bread. Mira divides the dough into portions that seem to know their own proper size, each piece falling naturally into proportions that will create loaves of ideal dimensions. She shapes each portion with movements that are part sculpture, part dance, her hands guiding the dough into forms that will rise into perfect ovals with tight, smooth surfaces and properly developed internal structure. The shaped loaves go into their proofing baskets, where they will rise a second time while developing the complex flavors that make the shepherd's dream bread so effective at promoting peaceful sleep. The baskets are arranged on wooden boards that have been seasoned with years of use, their surfaces smooth as silk and slightly concave from countless loaves that have rested upon them. While the specialty bread completes its final rise, Elias loads the first batch of regular loaves into the stone ovens. The loading process is an art in itself, requiring precise timing and spatial awareness to maximize the use of oven space while ensuring even heat distribution. He uses a long-handled wooden peel to slide the loaves onto the oven floor, the tool an extension of his arm that allows him to place each loaf exactly where it needs to be for optimal baking. The moment when bread enters the oven is always magical. but never more so than during the midnight hours when the transformation seems to partake of the mystery of darkness itself. The loaves seem to understand their purpose, rising confidently in the heat, their surfaces beginning to develop the golden color that speaks of proper fermentation and careful temperature control. Steam rises from the ovens like incense, carrying the aroma of baking bread that will soon fill the entire bakery and drift through the village streets to remind sleeping residents that someone is working through the night to ensure their morning comfort. As the first loaves bake, Mira prepares the ingredients for the next batch, maintaining the steady rhythm that will produce enough bread to meet the village's daily needs. But her attention keeps returning to the shepherd's dream loaves, which have reached the perfect degree of proof and are ready for their special journey into the transformative heat of the ovens. The scoring of these specialty loaves requires particular care. Using a blade so sharp it seems to cut through dough without resistance, Mira creates patterns on the surface that will control how the bread expands in the oven, while also serving as identification marks for the family who ordered them. The cuts she makes are not merely functional, but artistic, creating designs that speak of wheat fields under starlight, of sheep safely folded for the night, of children sleeping peacefully in their beds. When the shepherd's dream loaves finally enter the oven, they seem to glow with their own inner light, as if the loving intention that went into their creation has become visible in the heat. The oven receives them like a mother receiving her children, the ancient stones radiating the steady, even heat that will transform them from simple dough into bread capable of carrying dreams and promoting the deep rest that grief-stricken souls desperately need. The baking process requires constant attention, but not constant activity. There are moments when all the dough is either rising or baking, when the bakers can pause in their work and simply be present with the transformations occurring around them. These interludes are precious times when the deeper meaning of their work becomes most apparent, when they can feel their connection to the long line of bakers who have stood in this same space, performing these same rituals, serving their community through the ancient art of bread-making. As dawn approaches and the night's work nears completion, the bakery fills with the aromas that have been building throughout the hours of darkness. The scent of baking bread mingles with the residual fragrance of herbs and spices, creating an olfactory symphony that speaks of home and comfort, of tradition and care, of the miracle that transforms simple ingredients into sustenance for both body and soul. The final loaves emerge from the ovens with the perfect crust that only stone ovens can create, golden brown and firm to the touch, but yielding slightly under pressure, promising an interior that will be tender and flavorful. The shepherd's dream loaves in particular seem to radiate a sense of peace, their surfaces bearing the marks of careful scoring and their crusts singing the quiet song that perfectly baked bread makes as it cools. As the eastern sky begins to show the first hints of dawn, Elias and Mira arrange the night's production on the wooden shelves that line the bakery's front room. Each loaf is placed with care, positioned to show its best characteristics while also making efficient use of space. The regular breads take their familiar places, while the shepherd's dream loaves are wrapped in clean linen cloths that will preserve their moisture while allowing them to continue cooling properly. The transformation of the bakery from workplace to shop happens gradually as the light outside grows stronger. Display cases are filled with pastries that were baked earlier in the night. Prices are checked and adjusted where necessary, and the cash drawer is prepared with the change that will be needed when the first customers arrive. But even as the space prepares itself for the bustle of daytime commerce, it retains some of the sacred quality that characterizes the midnight hours. When everything is ready for the day ahead, Elias and Mira take a few moments to enjoy the satisfaction of work well done. They share a simple breakfast of fresh bread, still warm from the ovens, spread with butter that was churned by a neighboring farm's cows who graze in pastures fertilized with herbs known for their calming properties. The bread tastes of all the care and intention that went into its creation, satisfying not just hunger, but the deeper need for nourishment that connects us to the earth and to each other. As the village begins to stir and the first early customers appear at the bakery door, the magic of the midnight hours doesn't disappear, but rather transforms into a different kind of magic. The joy of sharing the fruits of careful labor with people who will carry the baker's intentions into their own homes and lives. The shepherd's dream loaves will go to the McDougall family, where they will provide not just physical sustenance, but emotional comfort, helping young Timothy find the peaceful sleep that has been eluding him since his father's death. And so the cycle continues, night after night, season after season, as it has for generations and will for generations to come. The midnight ritual of the village bakery serves as a reminder that some of the most important work happens when the world sleeps, that the transformation of simple ingredients into complex nourishment requires not just skill, but love, and that the ancient arts of bread-making connect us to something larger than ourselves, to our community, to our traditions, and to the fundamental human need to care for one another through the simple act of breaking bread together. As Mira hangs up her apron and prepares to return to her own cottage for a few hours of rest before the afternoon's preparations begin, she carries with her the deep satisfaction that comes from meaningful work well done. The rhythm of the midnight bakery has become the rhythm of her life, marking time not in hours and minutes, but in the eternal cycles of mixing and rising, kneading and baking that connect her to something timeless and essential in human experience. And in the ovens, the last coals burn down to glowing embers that will be banked and tended until midnight comes again, when Master Baker Elias Thornwell will once more descend those creaking stairs and begin anew the ritual that feeds not just the body but the soul of Willowmere Village, one carefully crafted loaf at a time. The End.